Although the notion of organisational culture is now frequently invoked in the organisations and management literature, it remains an elusive concept, fraught with competing interpretations and eluding a consensual definition. One review cites 15 different descriptions. Brown, 1995. Despite such diverse views, two broad schools of thought can be distinguished. Simmerich, 1983. Firstly, there is the family of approaches that regard culture as something that an organisation is. Here, culture serves as a metaphor for describing an organisation rather than being seen as something readily identifiable or separate from the organisation itself. In contrast, there is the group of approaches that conceive of culture as something that an organisation has. Aspects of variables of the organisation that can be isolated, described and manipulated. This distinction is crucial, for if culture is something that an organisation has, then it may be possible to create, change and manage culture in the pursuit of wider organisational objectives. However, if organisations simply are cultural entities, then their study may help us to understand the processes of social construction at work, but offer less in terms of shaping change or assisting with management control. Davis, 2000. Shine in 1985 developed a model of organisational culture which considers it consisting of three interrelated levels. The governing assumptions are the beliefs that guide everyday thinking and action in organisations. On a more conscious level are what Shine refers to as values and norms that prescribe how the organisation should work. This refers to principles, objectives and codes that the organisation values as significant. These norms and values can, over time, become taken for granted and become an aspect of the less visible governing assumptions. At the most concrete levels are what Shine terms artefacts, such as physical, behavioural and verbal manifestations. In Shine's cultural model, the various levels influence each other mutually. While governing assumptions expressed in norms, for example, influence behaviour, Shine also suggests that new ones form behaviour and new norms could change the governing assumptions over time. Shine's model thus opens up the possibility of analysing how deeper assumptions and beliefs are interconnected to espoused values and organisational symbolic and material artefacts. Horatius and Langman's 1996 analysis of change in a consultancy firm suggested cultural change is difficult to accomplish, since it usually requires at minimum that the normally hidden assumptions are made explicit and targeted. This supports Shine's view as it shows the important interconnection between levels and how culture change can fail if it does not target those levels. Culture is the sum of all that is shared, taken for granted assumptions that a group has learned throughout its history. Fox and Tan, 1997, suggests that culture is stable and resistant to change, taken for granted, derives its meaning from organisational members, and incorporates a set of shared understanding. This Fox and Tan definition focuses more on the group nature of culture, as opposed to Shine, which is more individually focused. If culture is considered as happening at the group level rather than the individual level, this has consequences in terms of how culture is aimed at being changed, as individual belief-based interventions are less likely to be successful. So you could use a theory of planned behaviour approach to target a specific behaviour for an individual to try and make some form of cultural adaptation, but that, on a group level, would not be successful. Also important to consider when defining organisational culture is how it can be developed. Shine in 1990 suggests that culture is learned, suggesting a role for modelling and reinforcement in establishing culture. One way this can occur is through norm formation around critical incidents, with the way leaders respond to these incidents being linked to the development of group norms and beliefs. Beyond 1959. This is one of the primary embedding mechanisms which Shine in 1990 suggests as key to the establishment of culture. The notion is that through these mechanisms a behaviour is learned through observation, and then secondary articulation and reinforcement methods take place, whereby culture that has been learned is reinforced, thus making it more stable. Methods for this are suggested by Shine as being the organisation's design and structure, the organisational systems and procedures, design of the physical space, stories, legends, myths and symbols, and formal statements of organisational philosophy. Broadly, there are three positions on the manageability of organisational culture. Alverson and Svensson, 2008. Organisational culture can, under certain conditions and with the sufficient skills and resources of top management, be changed. Changing organisational culture is very difficult, however it can still take place, and senior managers exercise some influence on value and meanings under certain circumstances, and culture changes beyond control. The first two positions suggest that organisational culture can be changed, but there are certain parameters on how it can be changed, and the third view suggests that it is impossible to change organisational culture. One view suggests that organisational culture can be changed through a top-down approach that is essentially planned. Alfson and Svenjonsson note that this approach follows the general scheme of Step 1, evaluating the situation of the organisation and determining the goals and strategic direction. Step 2, analysing the existing culture and sketching a desired culture. Step 3, analysing the gap between what exists and what is desired. Step 4, developing a plan for developing the culture. Step 5, implementing the plan. Step 6, evaluating the changes and new efforts to go further and or engaging in measures to sustain the cultural change. The common means for accomplishing cultural change seem to be a combination of the following. New recruitment and selection procedures so that people supportive of a desired culture will be hired. New forms of socialisation and training programmes to signal the desired values and belief. Performance appraisal systems in which the culturally correct ways of being and behaving are rewarded and encouraged. Promotion of people expressing and symbolising a desired culture. Leadership which communicates cultural values. And the use of organisational symbols, language, actions, e.g. the use of meetings in a richer way, the visible use of managers' time to signal what is important, and material objects such as a logo or dress code. A more process-orientated view is expressed by Beer in 2000, who advocates 7 sub-principles for organisational change. These are 1. Mobilise energy for change. 2. Develop a new compelling direction. 3. Identify organisational barriers to implementing the new direction. 4. Develop a task-aligned vision. 5. Communicate and involve people in implementation. 6. Support behaviour change. 7. Monitor progress and make further changes. According to this view, culture change is a project emerging from and run from above. It is assumed that top management is the agent from which superior insight about the needed change emerges, and also the chief architect behind the plan for change. Consultants are frequently used to back up senior managers in this kind of change project. It can also be an easy sell as a consultant to say to management that they will back up the senior management, which may result in it being a more often utilised approach than it merits in terms of its effectiveness. The company Tecanon was formally created as a separate legal entity as a result of the extensive restructuring of the parent firm, a global high-tech company called Global Tech. It was considered by management that the former internal unit needed a new culture to change its mindset. The stages through which this change was implemented fit well with the planning approach, where formulations of organisational change are based on perceived problems and the subsequent formulations of a new vision, missions and overall values. The cultural change programme seemed to accomplish very little. The efforts to make people focused on the key values targeted did not create any lasting impression, and most people seem to have confined work with culture to specific ritualistic events when they were asked to do so. The activities and talk in the programme do not align well to the substance of change as experienced by most people, something that normally produces not only frustration, but also sometimes cynicism around change work, Rikers et al. 1997. In the majority of cases, managers and others did not seem able, interested, or have the time to work with the cultural themes on an ongoing basis. Very few of the original objectives appear to have been accomplished, and as indicated by the examples, there are several reasons for this. However, the programme may have had unanticipated and unintended consequences in the sense that it produced or have reproduced and strengthened certain meanings, ideas and expectations characterising the organisation, including the view of top and senior middle managers as being invisible. This suggests the real danger that can occur through implementing a planned approach and not considering employees' views. A different perspective on how culture can be changed is through an emergent approach, with more of a focus on individuals being involved and change happening from a bottom-up perspective. Key to this is the notion of managers not influencing change, but of playing what Palmer et al. In 2006 suggested as the interpreter role, where they take a shaping approach as they try to involve people, influence opportunities, and provide encouragement. This notion that cultural change is possible, but that it can be difficult and essentially not controlled by leadership in the way they may desire, was shown by Scheel in 1985, who found that a new manager's efforts to change values in the organisation studied had no major effects that could be registered, although they did influence the expression of values. The limitations of top management were also supported by the findings of Ogbonna and Harris in 1998, who looked at an organisational culture change project in a large UK food retail firm. They found considerable and significant variance amongst organisational members who reinterpreted and reinvented the espoused values communicated by top management. While top management emphasised that the change was about developing a more customer-focused organisation, store managers thought it was mainly about reducing their numbers and power, and many shop floor workers believed the new conditions and practices were introduced in order to increase their exploitation. Whilst the various views were not in direct conflict, it seemed inherently logical that there is a serious potential for unintended consequences hampering change efforts. It is clear that different levels can take different perspectives on a change programme, particularly in larger organisations, resulting in it being hard for managers to control culture in the way suggested by the first view. Arveson in 2002 suggested an everyday reframing approach which connects to the view of leadership as the management of meaning, Simrich and Morgan 1982. This is where change is driven by a few senior managers and informal authorities. This approach is more incremental and informal, with not being set up as a big project with distinct activities, but is rather more concerned with actors influencing people they interact with and the desired ripple effect from this. Due to the comparative subtlety of this approach, it results in more natural communication, which is desired to renegotiate meanings within an organisation. This means that it is also better adapted to the material work situations of people, and has thus stronger action implication, which results in more analytic depth in terms of making clear the meanings and interpretations involved. An example of a case study where an emergent approach was used is when the London Borough of Barnet Housing Department, where they implemented a so-called lean approach in order to eliminate waste in the services to improve the quality for customers. This approach involved establishing a lean team to drive the project by involving staff from across the department. After the initial lean team experimented on new approaches, staff were invited to a decision accelerator event where a wider perspective of staff views were gained and further volunteers joined the lean team. Although external consultants were involved to give assistance where required, this approach is clearly very bottom-up. As a result of the intervention, team leaders became more attuned to identifying gaps in the skill sets and then coaching members of their teams. New structures were made, which meant team members needed to work together to access knowledge, and leaders physically began sitting closer to teams, which all helped to facilitate a more collaborative working approach. This more collective approach helped enable customer needs being better met, suggesting the change had a positive impact on the quality of the service. There were, though, some mixed views. While some found the Lean project to be a liberating experience that enabled them to have real involvement that they had not encountered in local government before, others were unsure on how the decisions were reached. These individuals retained some cynicism over whether the Lean approach was appropriate for housing, and questioned the speed at which changes had been implemented, suggesting that involving all staff may not necessarily guarantee satisfaction and agreement, which is surely necessary for real culture change, especially if there are issues with communication. Ackroyd and Crowdy in Collins 1998 said, "The findings of a good deal of case study work in the industry, and particularly that with an ethnographic or an anthropological focus, have suggested that cultures are highly distinctive, resilient, and resistant to change. This suggests that changing culture is difficult, and some suggest it is impossible. It is often considered that culture can be ambiguous and fragmented," Martin 2002. This suggests caution should be employed in addressing culture as a homogeneous object which can be changed through the employment of a homogeneous set of messages and practices. Ogbonna and Wilkinson in 2003 note that how people create meaning in their work experiences is related to local culture, which is contingent upon educational background, work tasks, group belonging, and interpersonal interactions. This means that senior actors' efforts to influence will often have limited impact and will typically be reinterpreted so that intended and received meanings may not overlap. This means making culture change happen can be hard. Indeed, with so many factors able to influence organisations from the outside, Langfield-Smith, 1995, change is made difficult. Due to this, it is argued that successful strategies need to take into account the needs, fears and motivations of staff at all levels. Beer, 1990. Furthermore, any attempt to influence key cultural dimensions needs to be part of a much wider assemblage of mutually reinforcing improvement activities. Williams, 1996. Another issue in terms of understanding if culture can be changed is that there are many competing definitions. If definitions include that of shine, changing culture in a predictable way becomes tricky, due to all of the assumptions that are not necessarily easy to understand that people will have. If culture is viewed more superficially, then it becomes easier for management to change culture. But then if this is just superficial change, it is debatable if the change is even worthwhile. There are also issues with studying culture in organisations to really understand if it can be changed, as it can call for in-depth interpretations, and it can require a long-term study also. It is frequently difficult to sort out cultural change from material and behavioural changes. Often cultural change is part of a set of changes in organisational structure, new ways of enforcing and monitoring behaviour, layoffs, or changes of people in key positions. Behavioural changes may reflect heightened surveillance and instrumental compliance, rather than changes in values and meanings. Ogbonna and Wilkinson, 2003. An example of this is Brown in 1995, who reports on a case study of attempted cultural change at Nissan, which highlights the real issue when quantifying behaviour change as some form of culture change. At Nissan, a new CEO put forward the motto that management and labour unions should both discharge their duties properly. He encouraged a downplaying of hierarchical relations and a stronger focus on the marketplace. He made attempts to improve communication and encouraged all employees to address each other as Mr. or Miss, regardless of their rank, which was a break from the earlier practice of using titles in communication. He also removed pattern-maintaining symbols, such as the wearing of uniforms, and introduced flexible working hours. However, this does not really reflect cultural change, but more that management has brought in new rules, and there may or may not be behavioural compliance, which reflects the effectiveness of these changes. However, this behavioural compliance should not be used as a barometer of culture change, because culture change should be about how employees embrace the values which are behind these behavioural changes. A cultural change is not that management tries to impose new behaviours, but a change on the ideas, values and meanings of a large group of people. Whether addressing other people as Mr. or Miss, left to a softening up of rank-related interactions and understandings or not, is impossible to say, without carefully listening to various people, encouraged or forced to adopt this new habit. Part of the problem is that trying to grasp cultural change in a heterogeneous company with 100,000 employees is difficult. The sheer size and heterogeneity of the object of study makes it difficult to avoid trivialising organisational culture.